Hello and welcome. Today I am sewing the Bella Dress View C. This little dress has a centre front split at the neck with self tie, a gathered skirt with inseam pockets and a gathered hem ruffle. The sleeves have gathers at the shoulders and elasticated cuffs, and the back features a button placket. Next I'm going to show you the cut pieces that you're going to need to make this style. So that was 2 pairs of pocket bags, 2 front ties, a pair of sleeves, 2 hem ruffle panels, a front and a back skirt, and the bodice panels. So we've got bodice lining and bodice outer. On the bodice outer you're going to need to attach interfacing to the wrong side at the centre back edge. Okay, so I've got the right side of the back lining up, and I'm going to place the right side of the front lining on top of it, face down. I'm going to do the same with the outer bodice, so right sides together, and we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam, which is 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so sewing the lining here and then the outer bodice. And the last shoulder seam now. Okay, so I've pressed the outer shoulder seams open. I'm putting right sides of the outer together at the centre front, and we're going to sew a 1 centimetre seam from the waist edge up to the neck, which is found approximately halfway up that seam. So same with the lining. I've pressed the shoulder seams towards the back. I've got right sides together, and I'm going to sew a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam from the waist edge up to that neck. Okay, so do that for the lining and for the outer. Now we have to prepare the ties. So right sides together, fold the ties lengthwise and sew a 6mm seam, which is 1/4 of an inch. And then we're going to trim that seam allowance back. I'm going to use a bobby pin or hairpin to turn this to the right side. So I've made a cut about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch down from one end. I've poked the end of the bobby pin into the fabric, and I'm just shuffling that fabric over the pin to turn it to the right side. Can be a little bit tricky to get started, but once you're sort of halfway it starts to get quite easy. I'll just show you that cut again. So that's 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre down from one end, poking that bobby pin in and shuffling the fabric over it. Okay, so the right side of the outer bodice is up on my table, and I'm going to attach the front ties using a basting stitch, which is just a long stitch on my machine, and I'm not back tacking because we will be removing those stitches later. This is just to keep those ties in place while I join the front and back bodice together. Now I'm sewing them 6mm or 1/4 of an inch down from the neck edge. Okay, so put right sides together of the outer and lining, and we're focusing on the back panels now. So there's a neck 1.8 centimetres in from the centre back edge, which is a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch, and we're going to sew that seam between those necks. And now we need to fold out the placket. So folding a fabric in towards the centre back and then backwards again at the second neck in from the edge. This is creating the back placket. You will notice that the back bodices now, once the pleat is folded out, they are the same size. Okay, so sewing the neck edge now, 6mm or 1/4 of an inch. Taking care not to stretch the fabric around those, the curvy parts. The curvy parts are on the bias. It's quite easy to stretch. Stretch into those curves, which you don't want to do. And making sure that the shoulder seams are pointing the direction that you need them to. So the outer bodice is open and the lining is pressed towards the back. Okay, now I'm changing to a 1 centimetre seam or 3/8 of an inch to close the front split. And you're sewing from the neck edge right up to the neck, and so your stitch line will stop right where your previous centre front seam has finished. You will need to move those seam allowances out of the way while you do this. Okay, and just making some small cuts into the neckline, which will just make it sit flatter when we turn it to the right side. And turning the bodice to the right side now, and just making sure at those centre back corners and centre front corners that I'm turning them neatly. And go over to the iron and give it a really good press. Okay, so that's the right side of the garment we're looking at, and this is the inside of the garment, so you can see that how that placket is now formed. Right, onto the sleeves. We need to put a gathering stitch into the top edge. You'll see there are 3 nicks. One is right in the middle, and then there's one either side. We want to sew in between the outer nicks with a long stitch length, 6mm down from the edge. That's our gathering stitch. Match the centre nick to the shoulder seam on the bodice and the outer nicks to the nicks that are on the bodice, and gathering them to fit. The rest of the sleeve should fit the rest of the bodice. Okay, we're going to stitch the outer and the sleeve together with a 6mm seam, which is 1/4 of an inch. And just making sure that those gathers are nice and even at the shoulder. And now we're going to do the burrito roll. So we're going to roll up that sleeve. We're going to open the shoulder cavity. We're going to fold up the other side of the bodice. And we're going to just poke everything inside that shoulder cavity and pinning it together. Making sure that our shoulder seams match up. And it's really important to keep the filling of the burrito inside. We don't want to accidentally catch part of the sleeve into the seam. And this is a 1 centimetre seam or 3/8 of an inch that we're doing now. Again, I just keep poking that fabric in so that I don't accidentally catch any fabric into the seam that I don't want to catch. Okay, now we're ready to turn this to the right side. So just gently pulling out some of that fabric, and you'll see that the sleeve seam is now fully enclosed into that shoulder. Go over to the iron and press that neatly. And then we can start on the next sleeve. Just showing you the inside of the garment now. Okay, so onto the next sleeve. So right sides of the fabric together. I've already done the gathering stitch. I'm pinning the centre neck and the outer necks to the correct place, using that gather thread together to fit, and the rest of the sleeve should fit. Now I'm opening up that shoulder cavity and rolling up that sleeve. This time there will be more fabric because you've got the first sleeve that you also have to roll up, as well as the other side of the bodice. So I'm poking all that fabric into the shoulder cavity and pinning at the shoulder seams, and then pinning at the waist edges. And I'm going to sew a 1 centimetre seam again, and now I can pull it all to the right side. Again, it's a bit trickier this time because there is more fabric stuck inside that burrito. Okay, so give it a really good press. And before we move on to the skirt, we're just going to have a look at the back plackets and overlap them, so the left bodice is overlapping onto the right bodice. You can either pin this closed or just do a basting stitch on your machine. Okay, over to the skirt. We're going to sew the pocket. So I've got the right side of the front skirt up, and I've got the right side of the pocket bag down, face down onto it. I'm going to sew a 1 centimetre seam between the nicks, 3/8 of an inch. Just make sure that your pocket bag is pointing the right way, and you know which is your waist edge and which is your hem. Now, making cuts where those nicks are right up to the stitch line. You can see that there. And I've overlocked between those nicks. Now I'm going to understitch this seam, which is just an edge stitch that catches the seam allowance underneath, and it helps the pocket bag roll neatly to the inside. Okay, putting right sides of the pocket bag together and sewing a 1 centimetre seam all around. I'm only sewing the pocket bags together, I'm not sewing anything else right now. Overlock around the pocket bag and just go over to the press and turn those corners neatly of the pocket mouth, and here I'm just doing a little basting stitch at each end of the pocket opening. And I'm only doing 1 pocket today because I ran out of fabric, but you can do 2 if you like. And now I am adding a gathering stitch to the top waist edge of the skirt. So it's 6 millimeters down using a long stitch length. I've done the center and then I've done the sides, the little angled side parts of the waist edge. Pinning the center nicks together, pinning the side nicks with the bodice seams, and gathering that skirt to fit. The waist seam will be sewn with a 1 centimetre seam or 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just using my snips to squash down those gathers and make sure that the gather remains even, and it doesn't, sometimes the presser foot sort of spreads it out and you don't get even gathers. Overlock that seam and go over to the press and press that seam allowance upwards. Okay, do the same for the back. So I've done the gathering stitch. Now I'm matching the center nick with the center of the back placket, matching the side nicks with the bodice seams and gathering everything to fit. So I've done a centimetre seam, overlocked it, pressed the seam allowance up. Now we're going to turn the garment inside out. So we've got right sides together, and we're going to close the side seams. We're going to sew right through the sleeve and down the sides with a 1 centimetre seam or 3/8 of an inch. Go ahead and overlock that, do both sides, and you can turn the garment to the right side and press those side seams towards the back of the garment. Now I've got the sleeve hem here, and I'm going to be creating the tunnel for the elastic. So double turning 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to be sewing right around, or almost right around. I'm going to be leaving approximately a centimetre or a bit more at the sleeve seam. I'm going to be leaving a gap so I can use that to thread the elastic through. And no, I'm not pressing this first. It's actually a lot easier if you just turn it with your fingers. Pressing a centimetre twice is actually, it's not that easy. Okay, using a safety pin to thread my 6 millimetre elastic or 1/4 of an inch wide elastic. Overlapping the elastic ends, making sure that I haven't twisted the elastic inside, and I'm just doing a hand stitch to join those 2 pieces of elastic. And then you can just close that gap in the tunnel up on your sewing machine. Okay, now we need to prepare the hem ruffle. So right sides together, we're going to sew them together at the sides with a 1 centimetre seam. And just quickly doing the other side. Then you can go to the overlocker and overlock those seams and press them towards the back. Okay, so you end up with a bit of a circle. Now, this is the top edge of the panel. I'm using a long stitch length and I'm sewing a gathering stitch right around, but I'm actually stopping at each side seam so that I've got a tail that I can use to make the gathers. Okay, and I've switched to the bottom edge, so the hem edge, and I'm double turning approximately 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. You can do it as fine as you like. And again, I don't press this first, I just roll it with my fingers. It takes a bit of practice, but it is very doable. Okay, so that's the finished hem, and you can go and press that hem flat. Okay, just showing you that frill, which is now ready, or ruffle, which is ready to attach to the skirt. So I've got my dress right side out. I'm going to slip the ruffle over the hem and the right sides are going to be together. So the wrong side of the ruffle is facing outwards. I'm going to locate the centre front and centre back nicks, pin them together, and pin the side seams. And then it's just a case of using those tails from the gathering thread, gathering stitch, and pulling them to create those gathers. Try and get this as even as possible, and you may like to use a few more pins just to keep the ruffles in place. There is quite a lot of fabric here. I'm sewing a size 8 year, so it is quite a wide panel, and it just takes a bit of patience sometimes. And I'm going to sew a 1 centimeter seam right around the ruffle. So that's a 3/8 of an inch seam. Trying to be a little bit patient, it does take a while. And then you can overlock that seam, and I will go to the press, to the iron, and press that seam upwards. Do use steam when you do this to set those gathers. Okay, now I'm going to mark the buttonhole position onto the placket using the template. I'm just marking the top and the bottom of the circle of each circle, and that tells me how big to make my buttonholes. My buttons are 10 millimeters, which are quite small. If you want to use bigger buttons, you just need to make your buttonholes bigger, longer. And using my snips just to open up those buttonholes, and then you can use the buttonholes to figure out the position of the buttons. I'm sewing them by hand. I do not like sewing buttons on my sewing machine. It's not a very nice experience for me. And now I'm just knotting the ends of the ties. And the dress is finished. So if you want to take a look at this pattern on Etsy, follow the link below. Head over to my Etsy store where you can see other patterns. This is a child's version of the Isabel dress. So there's an adult's version of this dress. It's almost exactly the same, except it doesn't have the button placket. It just slips over the head. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.